Welcome to the Southdale Library. The Hennepin County Library System has been very proud to present over the last 4 weeks Poets in the Library. Phebe Hanson is reading tonight. I think all of us in the room know Phebe. I have known Phebe for just 1 year. Phebe has, many poems. Her poems are found in books in our library. The most recent is Milkweed Chronicle. Those of you who have not purchased the latest edition of Milkweed Chronicle, I urge you to do so and read Phoebe's poems. I've just gotten to know Phebe over the last year. I met her at a party and didn't know very much about her. Getting to know Phebe is a lot like reading her poems. At first, I had no idea how old she was, and I moved below her. And after a few months, I saw a car seat in the back of her car, and I thought, oh, she and her husband have joint custody. And then I realized it was not her baby, it was her grandchild. And a lot of Phoebe's work is reflective of my impression of having a friend who is ageless and writes about all times. Her words are wise, as we will hear tonight. They intertwine with political consciousness, being a woman, and most of all, being a wonderful human being. Tonight, we will all hear Phebe Hanson.
Is that all right? You can tell, unaccustomed as I am to a microphone. Yeah. I would like to be able to pretend that this just happened a few minutes before. It didn't. I've been wearing them like this for about 3 weeks. But I have a pair on order at Dayton's. Maybe some of you don't know, I'm sure some of you do, but maybe some of you don't know that yesterday was Emily Dickinson's 154th birthday. So in honor of that event, and because I'll bet none of you celebrated it, I bet none of you thought to celebrate it, I'm going to read one of her poems. There was a series, on the brain, has been going on Channel 2. I didn't watch any of it. You'll find out why later on as I read a poem. But they should have had this poem of Emily's. The brain is wider than the sky, for put them side by side, the one the other will contain with ease, and you beside. The brain is deeper than the sea, for hold them blue to blue, the one the other will absorb, as sponges buckets do. The brain is just the weight of God, for heft them pound for pound, and they will differ, if they do, as syllable from sound. It takes a lot of chutzpah to start reading with a poem by Emily Dickinson and then go into your own work, but I had to read that because it was her birthday yesterday. Now, the first poem I'm going to read, I'll be a lot less nervous after I've gotten through this first poem, but I want to get out of the way. And then if anyone from the library wants to stop the reading, they can do so. It's called Library Club. It was sort of like a sorority, as I remember. Only girls got to join, but not just any girl who decided she wanted to. You had to apply and be sponsored by a member. And only a few were chosen to be in the club, chosen finally by the librarian, Miss Marion Gratz. And if you made it, you got to work in the library, got to be a librarian in training instead of having to go to study hall during your free period. If you got in, you were initiated in a special ceremony in the library, which was transformed after school by Miss Gratz, who pushed 2 wooden library tables together, covered them with a long lace cloth, placed white candles in tall silver candlesticks for the candle lighting ceremony, when the initiates took a sacred pledge to treat books with respect. There were flowers, an ornate silver tea service loaned by one of the St. Anthony Park mothers, little cakes and cookies, sandwiches with the crust trimmed off mince and pastel green and pale pink. All the girls who'd made it into the library club stood around awkwardly in their rayon dresses that they never wore to school on regular days. They even wore silk stockings with seams and high-heeled shoes with straps over their insteps. But how did I know what it was like, since I never made it into the library club, even though I applied? I heard about it from my friend Dagny, who sponsored me, and couldn't figure out why I didn't get in any more than I could, since I loved to read and respected books. I'd even read War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, which was more than she or any of the other girls who'd gotten into the library club had done. But Miss Gratz probably knew what she was doing after all. Probably guessed that years later, my daughter-in-law, after checking out a book at the library, would report back to me, "You'd better not try to take out any books. They've got your name on a list, you know, for non-payment of fines. You'll never get past the librarian." See, we'll wait now and see if anything happens. Then if nothing does, I'll go on. This next one is a seasonal poem. I can only read it once a year. I read it once last year, and then I revised it, and now I'm reading it again. It might do for a long time to come. Christmas letters. Here I am, living in my new apartment, all soul alone. As my mother used to say, when someone's husband had died and the children grown up and moved away, she's all soul alone now, all soul alone. This accompanied by a mournful shake of the head and that strange half-clicking sound. To be alone at Christmas time, that serious season for families, which seems to need multitudes of people coming and going. Yet that's not what I'm worried about, being alone. No, my first worry last year was that no one would know I'd moved, and all the Christmas letters would go to my husband, who still lived in the old house, to him who never bothered once in 30 years to address a Christmas card or labor over a Christmas letter. I even planned to get my letters out way before Thanksgiving, so I'd be sure to get all the Christmas letters at my new address. But instead, I let the opportunity pass, both last year and this. And now Christmas is almost upon us, and most people have already sent out their Christmas letters, or are at least certainly in the process of addressing them, while I've not even gotten out my file box of addresses, which I've carefully kept all these years, even documenting those to whom I sent and those from whom I receive. Yes, I'm not particularly proud of being so crass, but it hardly seems worth the trouble to keep those on the list who don't ever send back. But mostly I do it, so I won't forget to send to those who bother to write Christmas letters. Husbands come and husbands go. Well, actually, in my case, just one so far. And children move out and children move back in. Friends leave and new ones enter my life, but nothing could keep me from those who send me every year their Christmas letters. I know some people make fun of them, some even complain about them to Ann Landers, but I could not enter the new year without news of Dwayne, who's married to that woman I taught school with in 1952, and whose health problems I've followed faithfully in their Christmas letters for 30 years, including a grueling account of an agonizingly painful hemorrhoidectomy. Nor could I live without further news of Dorothy and Marvin. Dorothy was a waitress that I waited on tables with at the Skyroom in 1948, who last year wrote of their trip to Hawaii to attend their airline stewardess daughter's wedding to the airplane pilot boyfriend. But when they got there, they found out the daughter had fought with the husband-to-be, so the wedding was off. But they all had fun, the Christmas letter assured us, lying around in the sun, sipping Mai Tais, and there were pictures of them right on the Christmas card, shiny from suntan oil and smiling broadly as if their daughter's life hadn't been ruined. Nor could I bear not to hear from my friend who years ago was married to a foreign exchange student and whose house we used to go to at Christmas time for the ceremony of lighting the hundreds of tiny little real candles in the old European tradition, which I never found too charming because each of us was assigned a bucket of water to throw should the worst happen, and that somehow weakened the delight of the glowing candles. I still hear from her, even though she's long since divorced from that husband and married to a new husband who seems to be the one who writes the Christmas letters because they are full of his business successes and political pronouncements, how happy he is Reagan was reelected. And I would be so much poorer without hearing from my high school friend who still sends me her greeting every year, even though I haven't seen her since 1945. I remember after she had her first baby, how she swore that would be it, and then went on to have 7. They're all doing fabulously well, according to her Christmas letters. The oldest in graduate study at the London School of Economics, medical school for one of the daughters, law school for the other, a minor yet glamorous movie career for the third, and nuclear physics for the next to the youngest boy. So there's the one boy still living at home at age 27 who's never gone to college or held on a job for long. He's just hanging around until he gets his feet on the ground, as she always puts it in her Christmas letter. No, I couldn't go on. If I lost touch with all those friends whose lives once intersected mine, I like to think of them at Christmas time, all out there living their difficult lives, yet never giving in to despair, always making the best of it, and always finding in them just one more year in the midst of all the turmoil, the courage to sit down and write yet another Christmas letter. Now, I used to have the habit of reading my childhood. I've got a lot of childhood poems, as some of you have heard me before know. All my childhood poems first, and then the present-day poems at the end. But tonight I thought I'd rotate back and forth. Long underwear. While my sister is still asleep next to me in the bed, I lie awake, staring at the cracks in the rough plaster walls of our little stucco bungalow. Outside, another blizzard whips snow against our window, and no one will go to school today. But I get up anyway, the only one awake in the house, grab long underwear, saved from the day before. Back then, underwear was worn for a week from one Saturday night bath to the next. I race to the hot air register in the living room, let my flannel nightgown drop to the floor while I stand in forbidden nakedness, the rush of satanic heat blasting forth from the cold furnace below. When I hear the rest of the family stir, I pull the gray underwear over my legs, carefully wrap it around and around my ankles, hold it in place with long brown stockings, stare at the wrinkles, at the ugliness I won't discard until spring melts the stubborn snow of my father's caution and I can wear my legs naked again. Skating dream. It's been so long, you're not sure you can still do it, but the ice stretches out before you, not your childhood municipal rink, small and rough, but a smooth, glassy stretch that goes on and on like Hans Brinker's Zeider Z. So you strap on your father's skates, even though you used to make fun of them because they came from Norway, and you are off. How easy it is. You haven't forgotten after all. But just as you wonder what if it happens, the twig poking up through the glass, and you fall right through the ice and into the river, yet you never touch bottom, simply that lurching, which turns the world over and makes it new, while you rise up again to the surface, go on skating, learn to balance in spite of yourself. Through the years, some of my best friends have been Catholics. And one of them recently, just the other night, in fact, gave me, this is the side I want you to see. You can't really see it from there, but I'm wearing it just in honor of this poem, which is called, cleverly enough, Catholics. I never believed they stored armaments in their church basements, or that their nuns weren't allowed to go anywhere except in twos for fear they might run away. I wanted to be Catholic, like Catherine Ann Davidson, my best friend all through grade school. Besides being Catholic, she had red hair and was a tomboy like me. We both lived on roller skates from early spring, clamped them on as soon as snow first began to thaw, leaving little patches of clear sidewalk, roller skated roughly into all the stores downtown, even when the storekeepers glared at us. We were tough, played kick the can with the neighborhood boys, bar into the summer evenings, even when our mothers called and called for us to come home. And when Catherine Ann showed me the picture of Jesus on her bedroom wall with the bloody heart luridly extracted from his body, glowing on the outside of his robe, I wasn't afraid at all. I've had a lot of weird dreams through the years, and I finally decided there's got to be some use for these. So I turn them into poems from time to time. This one is called Bear. I am riding on a sled somewhere in Alaska, a bare skin underneath me. But as we speed on over the snowy tundra, I realize it's not a bare skin, but an entire bear who seems at first to be freshly killed and warm. But then he slowly comes to life under me, and we glide on over the icy wastes, pulled by some mysterious unseen force. When my hands get cold, I thrust them inside the bear's mouth, which is warm and throbbing with life, but does not harm me. I'm driving down a freeway alone in winter, almost sliding out of control because of the ice, going too fast, slowing down only for a small town, which appears as the road narrows. A dirty white bear, as bedraggled and beaten as the one in the Como Park Zoo, blocks my way. I almost hit him as he charges at my car, which dissolves until I'm only in my body of skin. No more metal to protect me from his claws sliding down my neck and back, but then he wraps me in my arms and I stop struggling, pretend to give in to his claws, lie there in the middle of the road, pretend not to breathe, so he will think I am dead and pass on. But he encompasses me more completely in his great furry arms, and I breathe again until his claws soften and turn into human hands. Christmas program. Today I drive through the first snowfall, flakes across my windshield like the bridal veil my mother kept wrapped away in crust tissue in our attic, soft and gauzy and so fragile I was always afraid it would melt when I played with it guiltily on winter afternoons while my mother was in the basement washing clothes and my father deep in his study writing sermons. I would lift out the veil and dress made of the fabric whose name I found written in my mother's wedding book, crêpe de chine. The dress she cut into the winter I was 5, when my father had no money to give her to buy me a new dress for the Sunday school Christmas program. So she cut up her wedding dress, made it over for me, tied a red grosgrain sash around my waist, topped it off with a bunchy red bow for my hair, and walked me over to the church for the program. I had carefully practiced my recitation over and over, and now I knew it by heart. How many things we learned then by heart. The Sundwald sisters learned all 5 verses of We Three Kings of Orient Are by heart, sang them in their deep alto voices, stood there in choir robes meant to make them look like Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar, leaned into each other and swayed to the words of the chorus, Star of wonder, star of might, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to the perfect light. And their swaying hypnotized me back into summer, into wondering whether Orient tar was anything like the black tar that softened in the heat on the road outside our house, until we could dig it out with our fingers and form it into soft, warm balls. Some daring ones were said to chew, pretending it was gum. I was so deep into my tar I didn't even hear Mrs. Thorsted, the Sunday school superintendent, call my name, and my mother had to push me gently up to stand in front of the altar rail and recite. If I were just as big as you, I'd tell you what I'd like to do. I'd like to find the girls and boys who nothing know of Christmas joys and tell them of our Jesus. Then as I swung confidently into the second verse without pausing, I'd like to see the manger bed where little Jesus laid his head and hold his little hand in mine and look upon his face so kind. 2 boys sitting in the front row, Delbert Molly and Leroy Oyam, who had no desire whatsoever to hold Jesus' little hand in theirs, started punching each other and making such a commotion I dropped my head down to look at them so fast my bow almost slipped off my hair, but that didn't stop me. I just went on reciting all 7 verses because I'd gone to a lot of trouble to learn them by heart. And I was afraid if I didn't finish, Mrs. Thorsted might not give me one of the little brown paper sacks that were handed out to all the children right before the benediction, right after all the pieces were said. Way down in the bottom of that sack was only one chocolate-covered white cream, and I always dug down through the bright ribbons and fat pillows of hard candy to bring that dark wonder up from the bottom, to look at it first surreptitiously, knowing I shouldn't eat it right there in church, holding it cupped in the palm of my hand while I ran the tip of my finger lightly over the swirl decorating its peak, then biting into it slowly, slowly, tiny bites that I allowed to melt in my tongue and dissolve down my throat. So by the time my father had stepped up to the pulpit to thank all the children and Sunday school teachers for the fine program, which would certainly redound to the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ, who came down to the sin-sick earth to be born in a lowly manger among the humble barnyard animals, the last of that dark mound had disappeared but I still knew it by heart. Learning to write. This is where it all began. Every Thursday, we have penmanship period in Miss Ferguson's second grade room. The Palmer method, where the whole forearm moves rhythmically across the scarred wooden desk, and Vern Molly sits behind me and pulls my long braids when I'm trying to write. But I ignore him because he's dumb. He eats school paste, and everybody knows it tastes horrible. Even though the wintergreen smell might tempt you to try it, you know better than to think there'd be anything good to eat in school. Not that you don't like school. You do. You like the strictness of having to do everything just so. The exact instructions given by Miss Ferguson on how to position your forearm during penmanship period, the paper slanted at just the right angle on the desk, the constant struggle to keep the forearm flat on the desk surface. Oh, the warnings, to keep the entire arm moving and not just the wrist and hand. Oh, the warnings against only moving your wrist, even though you know you can control the way you form the letters so much better when you do it the wrong way. That Palmer handwriting chart is always a constant reminder there, flowing above the entire length of the blackboard. And each time you dip your stick pen with its little silver nib into the glass inkwell embedded in one corner of your desk, usually covered with a little hinged metal cover, but open now during penmanship period. Each time your pen touches down into that dangerous black liquid in the dark, wet well, you determine to do better, to do it perfectly this time, to form your first letters, your first handwriting without blot. Some of you know that I've had for years an adversarial relationship with my cars. But I have found him at last, so I've written a poem. Love poem to my auto mechanic. I found him at last, the perfect mechanic. After struggling for years with insolent men in garages who can't even get my name right, calling me BB and Fifi and PB and once Freebie. Lloyd got my name immediately. Says it perfectly every time. When I brought my '75 Dodge Monaco in for its winter tune-up, he bothered to take time to explain the $242.60 bill, which I rather shyly mentioned seemed a bit steep for a tune-up. But when he handed me the 5 pages of checklists, 9-step winter radiator service, Duluth grease job with 23 items checked off, ignition system tune-up and scope check, 7 more essential items, free tire inspection, and 6 replacements, air filter, gas filter, PCV valve, distributor cap, and rotor, spark plug, wire, plus tightening fan belts, he won me over with his patient 20-minute explanation of why all this was necessary. So I was baffled when the car stalled next night in the intersection as I was on my way to a poetry reading, but I borrowed my friend's car and abandoned mine, as I have a way of doing. Once I abandoned a rental car on 35W after it had broken down 5 times coming home from the North Shore. And the St. Paul police towed it away from Western and Selby to their impound lot. When I called Lloyd and told him about it, he said, "Oh, I'll go right over and get it." He figured out then why the car had broken down, and as he put it, absorbed the cost of the redemption from the impound lot and the new repairs. A week later, when he called to tell me my check for $242.60 had not, as he so nicely put it, cleared, he never once uttered a word of criticism, never let on when I dropped by the next day with handfuls of $20 bills to make good the check that he was even mildly annoyed. Dear Lloyd, I have found in you at last the perfect mechanic and the mother for whom I've been searching all my life. Duluth, Minnesota. I spent a very happy year of my life in Duluth, Minnesota, living with my grandparents. I was 9 years old. I celebrated my 10th birthday. It was actually the only birthday party I had as a child, so that's probably why it was such a big year for me. But this is a poem not about my birthday party. It hurts, when that one has to do the entire job of supporting, but I gotta wear them. Duluth, Minnesota. My grandmother, I should say something about my grandmother first. My grandmother was a Swedish immigrant. She came to Duluth in 1908 with her husband and my mother, who was then 4, and her brother, who was 6. And my grandmother never learned to read or write. She'd not learned to read or write Swedish, and she rarely learned to speak English. She spoke a very broken English, and she, of course, never learned to read or write English. And I remember one of my child memories from that year spent in Duluth was going with her she loved to spend money. And I used to go with her to the Glass Block, which was then one of Duluth's finest stores. I don't know if it's even there any longer. And I remember being so embarrassed to watch her sign the X, the little shaky X. She even had a hard time making the X on the charge slip. This isn't a poem about that either. But it is about my grandmother, who was, as I say, ignorant, but not stupid, very superstitious, but very smart in many ways. And she believed that I had far too much hair in my arms. Now I'll read the poem. Duluth, Minnesota. My grandmother waves her arms above the flame of her gas stove, shows me how to singe the hated hair, urges me to join her in hairless beauty. Downstairs, Harold Goldfarb waits to beat me at Chinese checkers, waits for my smooth white arms to float above the checkerboard. Will he wonder at the smell of burnt hair? Swedish girl, Jewish boy, what do you know of burning? Of warehouses where mounds of hair wait, stockpiled, unburnt, wait to be woven into good German garments. I wrote that poem shortly after I'd seen the movie Night and Fog, which some of you may have seen. And one of the images that really made an impression on me, there were many, of course, but were the huge mounds of hair in the warehouses. This poem is dedicated to my dentist and my dental hygienist. Pseudonyms are used here. They might not like it if they thought I had written a poem about them, although it's a very loving poem. Gloria and Gary, it's called. Gloria says when I come in, as if she doesn't care it's been 2 years since my last visit, and I haven't even been flossing faithfully. So you've moved from Irving Avenue. You lived there a long time, didn't you? And I tell her, yes, 30 years in the same neighborhood, 30 years in the same marriage. But I've moved out now, over to St. Paul, live all by myself for the first time in my life. This news silences her as she settles me into the chair, and we wait for Gary. He doesn't know I think of him as Gary, but I've gone to him so long, and we've been through so many abscesses, so many rows of gold crowns, and an endless array of root canals, that I feel comfortable with him. Think of him as one of my best friends. The whine of his drill sounds positively cozy as he and Gloria chat companionably above me, their soft, dry hands firmly pressed against my face. Even when Gary tells Gloria to get the rubber dam and the clamp, I'm not alarmed. It's early in the morning. KSJN on the radio, just like at home. The heat burgeoning through the room. I could sit here forever, safe in their arms, their bodies nestled around my head, protecting me from all the bad news out there. His conversation murmuring into my teeth. Yep, just a little ways longer to go. Boy, I always knew I was a good dentist, but I didn't know I was this good. This is working out just beautifully, Gloria. Look at this, will you? We'll have you out of here in no time, Phoebe. And then there's no sound for a while, except the radio and the harmless drill, until out of the blue, Gloria's words drop on my head. So why did you leave him then, after 30 years? Why did you leave? Of course, the answer is, oh. That's not in the poem, but that's the answer. Any of you here ever heard of Santa Lucia? Maybe we could do a fast chorus of the song. It's a little hard, though, to sing, and I couldn't begin to lead you. But this is a poem called Santa Lucia. I used to think it was just such a lovely little celebration until I didn't realize what it was really about until I read an entry in the Encyclopedia Britannica a few years about Santa Lucia. December 1938, and my grandparents give their yearly party at the church where my grandfather is janitor. Everyone comes to honor Lucia, strange saint for Swedes, virgin and martyr of Syracuse, whose fiancé denounced her when she became a Christian, ordered boiling oil and burning pitch poured over her stubborn head. But on this night, I am 10, know nothing of that other Lucia. Know only I get to put on the long white choir robe, tied with red satin sash, get to wear the crown of candles that remind everyone of the light she brought when she appeared to Swedish peasants during a famine. I am afraid, as Grandma lights the candles and the crown on my head, that the flames will catch my hair on fire, but I walk in slowly, head held straight, carrying a tray of julekaga, and deliver pieces of the bread to all the Swedes gathered in Gloria Day Lutheran Church that long ago December night, just before the world burst into flames. This poem is dedicated to a student of mine who's here tonight, Amy, who shares with me a constant appearance of teeth in our dreams, and also Amy has teeth in her artwork. If you ever get a chance to see any of Amy's teeth works, don't miss it. But I wrote this poem. It's been kicking around for a long time. I don't think I've ever read it out loud before because I never could finish it. I don't even know if it's still finished, but what the heck, it certainly is neatly typed. Looks finished. Teeth. I kneel by my bathtub, try to gather up all my teeth which have fallen out, some in twos and threes, some singly, dropping with deadly clinks onto the white porcelain. I realize the impossibility of my task, despair that I will ever succeed. I get up off my knees, look at myself in the mirror, at all those gaps in my gums, the desolate emptiness of those dark holes. I drop down beside the tub again, unwilling to give up yet. Pick up one tooth at a time, try to insert it back into my gums. None of them will go in. Then I suddenly realize that some of them are connected to plaster of Paris skulls. They are in upside down. The men in the blue coats in the subterranean dental lab have made a terrible mistake. It is no use, I tell myself sternly. I shall have to reconcile myself to the loss of my teeth. I awaken to first light, fingering my naked gums. Now, there's a word in here that you may not recognize. The word is lumbago. How many of you know what it is? Oh, good. 55 and over. Or 45 and over. I don't think it's used anymore. Lower back pain is what it's called now. But I like the word lumbago. I have no idea what it means or where it comes from. When my father had lumbago, he couldn't bend down to tie his own shoelaces. I had to do it for him. Me with my mother no longer around to tie mine. She'd gone off to the cemetery, one-way trip, despite what my father said about her going to be with Jesus for a while. So I learned how to tie shoelaces, at least my own. But somehow it seemed awkward to do it for him. He was larger than life, even at home, away from his pulpit. It was as if God had admitted to some human frailty, admitted there were things even he couldn't do, simple things you'd ask an 8-year-old to help you with. Christmas vacation. This is dedicated to my offspring, one of whom is in the audience tonight. Rolf, Eric, and Leah. Christmas vacation. I gathered them all into the kitchen. Okay, kids, you're all 18 or older. From now on, I'm not your mother, just your friend. Call me Phoebe. And they sigh, "Oh, Mother." But when they go away to college, I write them long letters, sign them Mother, even though their letters are short and mostly ask for money. And when my daughter comes home during her vacation, sick with pneumonia, I take days off from my teaching job, bring her all her meals in bed, sit all day with her, watching soap operas together, dozing, reading, writing in our journals, talking, 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 the lovely languor of a sickness from which you know you'll both recover. Motherhood as a disease, I don't know that the right-wingers would like it. Motherhood's an institution. I mean, it's a glorious American institution, and it should not be denigrated ever. And I'm sorry that I even made a hint. Now, I have broken down and done something that I probably used to think I'd never do. I've written a poem about my granddaughter. I don't have a picture here for you to see. I don't have one of those little things you pull out of your billfold. But I have a poem. Granddaughter, every Tuesday I pick her up from her parents' green shingled house near Riverside Park, where I used to go on picnics with my husband when he and I were students at Augsburg College back in the 40s. She's 15 months old now, was born with a midwife in attendance on her parents' futon, and I saw her the very same day, looked down at that improbably tiny body, remembered how I'd given birth to her father a few blocks away, St. Mary's Hospital, March 25th, 1956, light snow falling, sadness in the late afternoons when all my visitors had left and I was alone, the baby down the hall in the nursery, getting to see him only when the schedule allowed him to be fed. Today, when I carry my granddaughter out the door of her house, she holds out her blue mittened hands and announces, "No, no." And I see it again for the first time. In my apartment, she walks over to my basket of Lake Superior rocks, sits down beside them. I join her on the floor, and she solemnly picks up rock after rock with infinite patience, looks long and intently at each one before she hands it to me in a ritual that goes on until all 27 rocks have been passed back and forth at least 2 times. I think about her after she's gone, miss her during the week when I'm alone. I miss her grandfather, too, who isn't around when I'm with her, the way he used to be when we sat on the floor together and watched our first baby play. I dreamed about my granddaughter last night, that she'd learned to talk in complete sentences in only 1 week's time. "Grandmother," she said, "nothing is ever the same, but sometimes it's better." Last week when we were at the Como Zoo, we watched the monkeys cavort like children in their glass cages. I held her firm body as she pressed her face against the glass wall, and when one of the monkeys came rushing toward her, she didn't cry, just looked astonished for a moment, then burst into laughter as my arms tightened around her. One of the stores whose demise I mourn is Rathbun Antique Studio. Some of you may know it. It used to be on Pillsbury. There's an advertising agency there now. It's not quite the same. I mean, God knows I love advertising agencies. Yes, I do. Some of my best friends are in advertising. But I still do wish for Rathbun Antique Studio to be back in business. And this poem was triggered by a visit to that store. It's called, strangely enough, Rumble Seat. I mean, it isn't really about something I saw there after all. But that's how it started out. Yesterday in the antique store, I walked into a pale peach chiffon dress, like the one Arlene Ockvik wore for her confirmation in 1935. An antique dress now, but brand new then, and store-bought, with cape sleeves, bias cut, draped softly over her white arms, skirt with scalloped hem that dipped and rose against her slender legs, in silk stockings for the first time. She lives still in my father's attic, where the pictures from his confirmation classes lie stacked next to his old theology books. And this morning she calls to me from behind the wet stones of the old houses I pass on my morning walk down Summit Avenue. Her hair in soft waves, finger waves we call them, formed by fingers dipped in thick wave lotion. My girlfriends and I yearned to know how to do it, envied the older girls like Arlene with their finger waves swooping down around their bland, impassive faces in the confirmation picture, her eyes movie star languid, her mouth impatient. I watched her from afar, a child mild and obedient, and later I heard the grown-ups whisper how she had grown wild, like the wildness of my own daughter at 16, who went out with a 27-year-old punk rock singer. Arlene Oakvik rode in rumble seats with boys from Hector and Clarkfield, towns only a few miles down the road from our town of Sacred Heart, but foreign and strange to us, dark with mystery. She rode away from her confirmation vows to renounce the devil and all his works and ways, rode away to drink beer and laugh loudly with rough older boys in rumble seats, uncovered passenger seats that opened out from the rear of their cars, not family cars with safely enclosed back seats, but wild roughneck cars, open to the wind, gravel spitting into their laughing mouths. Arlene Oakvik, killed in a car crash coming home from a dance in Hector, her gravestone next to our families in that little cemetery on the outskirts of town. Arlene Oakvik, far older than me, her eyes in the confirmation picture already seeing what I have not yet looked upon. At last. This is the third to the last poem. At last. I like it, you know, in a sermon the minister says, and firstly and secondly, and when he says thirdly, you get your hopes up unless it's a 5-part sermon. Sometimes they are. But in a poetry reading, it's sometimes hard to know when it's going to end. So I'm giving you a little warning. This is the third to the last. At last. I tried over and over again, patient with myself, cajoling, encouraging, but occasionally threatening, like a parent giving in to the quick slap in the face, regretted at once the startled look in the eyes of the child, like a newborn held upside down, dismayed by the dryness of the world after so much swimming. Today, I stand before a new mirror, bought on impulse at Kmart, full length, the sight I've been careful to avoid for years, preferring to look only at my face in small pocket mirrors or my reflection in the glasses of others, those who are rising in the world, serene in their confidence, never once doubting their ability to make a mark on the page, while I faltered, scratched over, erased, messed up my stories on the backs of envelopes, crumpled them up, crammed them into garbage bins before morning, and trucks entered the alley at the corner of regret and despair, those cross words of unforgiveness. But then it came, the sweet release of stone opening to let in fresh wind and rain falling on hair that has been let loose from its pins at last. This poem is not totally finished, I don't think, but because the person to whom it's dedicated and the person who's really responsible for its being written is here, I have to read it. It's for Joan, who loaned me her color TV. When I moved into my apartment a year ago, she came to see me, and it took her such a long time to get up the stairs. I went to see what was the matter. And there she was struggling up the stairs with this enormous color TV. I said, but I don't watch TV. She said, I know you don't, Phoebe, but you're living alone now. You're going to thank me for this. So, this is what it's come to. The poem is called Why I Want to Marry Rockford. I don't need to read the poem. Besides, it isn't really finished. I mean, it is not a nice copy. I've been going to sleep with him every weeknight for over a year now, and I can't think of anyone else I'd rather spend the rest of my life with. His trailer on the beach seems just right, too. After 30 years of life in large Kenwood houses, I'm sick of shabby gentility. A trailer seems perfect to me. So manageable. So neat. Besides, I've always wanted to live in LA. And I find myself craving tacos every morning. Another reason I know it's meant to be. We've got the same attitude towards money. Easy come, easy go. Even our telephone answering machine attracts the same kind of messages. Terse demands from bill collectors who always leave only their first names, call Craig at 291-2964. Or peevish complaints from friends who claim you don't live up to your promises to return calls. Right at this very moment, as I watch him from my bed, he's involved with that woman, Joanne Van Ark, or Val rather, from Knott's Landing, who just had twins the other night. Oh, and there's that man from Bob Newhart's old therapy group. Now that Bob's running a country inn, he's joined Rockford in some elaborate con game. Good to see him again. And Beth, good old Beth, I know she and I would settle right in to become the best of friends. I like all the same people he does. There's no doubt in my mind but that we're meant for each other. Well, maybe I won't bother to finish it. Just let it go. So this is the last one. And this one also is dedicated to people who are in the audience. I was just going to use their first initial, but they've allowed me to use their full names. They haven't heard the poem, of course. Little respite here for the sore ear. Pink Bubble for Mary and Gladys. Here I am at the north shore of Lake Superior, Tofty, Minnesota, this time in December, with two women friends on a 3-day spiritual retreat, fully planned back in Minneapolis to include at least 24 hours of fasting, modified at the last minute by our decision to allow ourselves liquids. So we packed the car with juices: cranberry, raspberry, pineapple, coconut, apple, carrot, and orange, lemon-flavored mineral water, herbal teas, chamomile and anise, and sleepy time, and just in case we have a change of heart, a large bottle of brandy. We've agreed also to at least 3 hours of silence each day. And before the first period of silence, to get us ready, we listened to a meditation exercise led on a cassette tape by Shakti Gawain, whose book on creative visualization I've read before I came, and whom I creatively visualized as being from some exotic country such as India or Tibet, but who turns out to sound on the tape heartily Scandinavian Midwestern. Someone you'd never be afraid to let talk you into a creative visualization, so firmly grounded does her voice seem in its matter-of-factness. We all sit straight back in chairs facing the picture window that looks out on Lake Superior. And she asks us to breathe deeply and naturally, always hard advice for me to follow since I am by nature a shallow breather, one who sometimes awakens in the night in panic that I can't get another breath. And she urges us to imagine an image of some delightful place where we can be with whomever we wish, doing what we desire. And unbidden, he appears. A totally unexpected image, the Buddha himself. That fat little strangely erotic statue I saw at David's house a few weeks ago, the morning I had breakfast with him before he moved to Arizona. But this Buddha is sitting on the fur rug of my bedroom, smiling his smile of infinite cosmic humor, the majestic folds of his belly lapping and overlapping in unashamed fatness, and I am opposite him on the floor. While Shakti continues to talk, our images shed their clothes and we become totally naked. I wonder briefly what Shakti would think, but after all, this is partly her fault. Perhaps I have come too totally under the spell of her affirmations exercise. The more I love and appreciate myself, the more beautiful I become. I am now irresistibly attractive. And soon the Buddha and I begin to embrace, followed rather quickly by a roiling around on the fur rug, which could hardly be called spiritual. How odd, I think, that I am abandoning myself to someone so unlike Jesus, that lanky, bony figure who has followed me all my life, from the garishly painted Sunday school picture cards where his body is enfolded in intricately draped robes, to his embarrassingly diapered body hanging on the old rugged cross, his spindly legs toughened by all the walking around Galilee he did, and I wouldn't be surprised to find he occasionally broke into a run. But the Buddha, he never exercised as far as I know, nor did he travel. But he rather sat under a tree and let the people come to him. I'm not thinking of all this during the visualization because Shakti keeps on talking and keeps us pretty busy imaging. And now she's telling me to surround my fantasy with a pink bubble, because pink is the color associated with the heart, and it will bring you that which is in perfect affinity with your being. So underneath that pink bubble on the white fur rug, the Buddha and I let the flesh have its way, so to speak, while the sun above Lake Superior forced its relentless beams into the picture window of Olson's Motel, and the ice glittered on the rocks, and the waves continued to roll. Thank you. There's a question period. I was supposed to leave a little time for a question period. So if you want to ask a question, makes me very nervous, but go ahead. Fire away if you want to ask a question. Could ask me what my sources are, Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, and the Bible. Pardon? When are you getting rid of your answer? See, that's my son. I don't have to answer. He's the one that causes all those, because he refuses to talk to the phone machine. Never. No, seriously, does anyone have a question? Yes.
When are you going to have a book?
One of these days, when the Buddha says the time is right. We could just go right over to the Xerox machine now, and I could run off copies for you of any poems that you'd like. Any other questions?
Do you have one more poem for us, Phoebe?
Do I have one more? I do have a few other poems, but I can't remember what they are and whether they're appropriate to read. Okay. Well, I'm going to read this one. I decided not to, but because it's so odd. It's not really that odd, but why not? Read it. I wrote it a couple of years ago when I was teaching at Central High School. It resulted from a writing exercise that I had the students do. El Salvador. She pours orange juice from the cut glass pitcher, gazes at the daffodils, fresh from the florist in the vase by her morning paper. In El Salvador, fighting continues, while advertisements for summer clothes urge her to buy now for the resort season. Back on the farm where she spent her childhood, the old outhouse still sits, deep in the grove, surrounded by rusting cars she used to play in. When they butchered pigs, she would run to the grove and hide in the back seat of her father's abandoned Ford that used to stir up the gravel on the country road leading to town, and the gas station run by Darrell Mallam, who never came back from the South Pacific after World War II, never again heard the humming of human voices on the rows of telephone wires stretched from pole to pole, straight off the edge of the world. Are there any other questions? Okay.
Probably, I don't know when they will be on TV. We will indicate when they'll be on TV in the program bulletin. Once a month, the Hennepin County system puts out a program bulletin. And they're available in the lobby if you want to see what other programs the system has put in. Also, it's published in the newspaper, the cable programming is published in the
Depends on the
paper.
cable system. It'll be
And it
on various
depends
cable
on the
systems
cable
throughout the
system.
system.
The first one,
Phoebe
Raisa
will
has
know.
to call.
Right. Phoebe will know. The programs have to be put together and edited, so I'm sure that will take at least a month. So I would say in the beginning of next year, January, February.
Probably before my book comes out.
Thank you.